What does it take for a community to turn on one of its own? What is the breaking point where the carefully constructed illusion of neighborly peace shatters, revealing something much uglier underneath? For one family in Jacksonville, Florida, the answer was shockingly simple. All it took was a flag. A simple piece of fabric, bearing just 3 words, Black Lives Matter. To the River Point Community Homeowners Association, this flag was officially labeled a nuisance. A violation. Something that needed to be taken down, immediately. They sent a formal, intimidating letter demanding its removal. But the family at the center of this storm, the Mickle family, insists this was never really about a flag. They argue it was about them. It was about their presence as a black family in a neighborhood that, in their view, preferred them to be silent, to be invisible. Now, this is no longer a simple dispute over a violation letter. This has exploded into a federal lawsuit. The family is taking their HOA to court, not for a bylaw infraction, but for racial discrimination. They are turning a battle over a piece of cloth into a major civil rights showdown. This is the story of how the ideal of the suburban American dream can become a waking nightmare, and how one family's refusal to be silenced is challenging the very foundations of power in their own neighborhood. To truly grasp how a single flag could ignite a federal lawsuit, you have to first understand the profound meaning of a home. A home is so much more than wood, plaster, and shingles. It is the backdrop of our lives, the one place on earth where we are supposed to feel unconditionally safe. For Antoine Mickle, his house in the River Point community wasn't just a building. It was the physical embodiment of a dream he had spent nearly 2 decades working to build and to protect. He purchased his home almost 19 years before this firestorm began. He planted roots in this neighborhood, a place he and his family hoped would be a peaceful, stable community to raise their children and live their lives. A home is your sanctuary. It's the stage for your family's memories, the silent witness to your joys and sorrows. It's the foundation upon which you build your entire life. For the Mickle family, for almost 20 years, this house was their anchor. Over the course of 2 decades, they did more than just live in the neighborhood. They became a part of its fabric. They witnessed neighbors come and go, children grow up and move away, and the seasons change, year after year. They paid their dues and put up with the typical, often frustrating, nitpicking that comes with living under the authority of a homeowners association. But this was their space, their corner of the world. Imagine the feeling of pride that comes with owning your own home. The simple act of pulling into your driveway after a long day, knowing that everything and everyone within those walls is yours to cherish and protect. It's a feeling of permanence, a sense of belonging. Antoine Mickle was living that dream. But that feeling of security, of permanence, began to erode long before the flag ever went up. Over the years, he started to feel an unsettling, targeted pressure from the HOA. In a press conference, he described a pattern of being singled out for minor infractions that other neighbors seemed to get away with. He spoke of being cited for the color of his mulch, a seemingly trivial detail, while other homes with the same mulch were apparently ignored. This wasn't just about landscaping, it was a constant, low-level hum of scrutiny that made him feel different. The feeling of being targeted went beyond official letters. He recounted deeply uncomfortable moments where neighbors would simply stand on the sidewalk in front of his yard, gawking at him, their silent stares making him feel so exposed and unwelcome that he would retreat back inside his own home. He described a pervasive sense of loneliness, of being an outsider pitted against what he called a powerful force in his own community. This wasn't just in his head. That persistent feeling of being watched, of being held to a different, unspoken standard, chips away at the very security a home is meant to provide. It poisons the well. It turns your sanctuary into a source of constant, grinding anxiety. Your anchor begins to drag. For 20 long years, Antoine Mickle weathered this quiet storm, enduring the subtle pressures and the uncomfortable stares. But in the summer of 2020, as the entire world was erupting in a long overdue conversation about racial justice, that storm was about to break down his front door. The year 2020 was a moment of global reckoning. Sparked by a series of tragic events, conversations about race, justice, and systemic inequality were happening on a scale not seen in generations. On street corners, in corporate boardrooms, and around family dinner tables, people were finally talking. For millions of people, particularly Black Americans, showing support for the Black Lives Matter movement felt deeply personal, urgent, and necessary. Antoine Mickle was one of them. Living in his neighborhood, he saw his neighbors expressing their own views. He saw them using their own homes and their own property to declare their allegiances and beliefs. He He felt it was only right, only fair, that he could do the same, to make a simple, quiet statement that his life, and the lives of people who look like him, mattered. So, he did what countless others across the country and around the world were doing. He put up a flag. It was a simple, unassuming black and white flag with just 3 words printed on it. Black Lives Matter. For the Mickle family, this was not intended as an act of aggression or defiance. It was a profound affirmation of their identity. It was a quiet tribute to the countless lives lost to injustice and a simple declaration of their own value in a world that often seemed to question it. In a neighborhood where other flags were a common sight, he had no reason to believe his would be an issue. The River Point community was dotted with flags for political candidates, flags for college sports teams, and even rainbow flags celebrating LGBTQ+ pride. Flying a flag, by all appearances, was a perfectly normal and accepted way for residents to express themselves. But on the very first day the Mickle family's flag went up, a letter arrived. There was no knock on the door, no friendly conversation over the fence, no neighborly chat. What came was a formal, intimidating notice from the River Point Community Association, delivered by its management company. The letter was a masterclass in bureaucratic threat. It didn't mention the flag's message. It didn't mention Black Lives Matter. Instead, it used the cold, detached language of bylaws to deliver its payload. The letter cited a vague and dangerously powerful nuisance clause, a rule that prohibited any noxious or offensive activities on a resident's property. The implication was staggering, and it landed like a punch to the gut. The HOA was officially, in writing, classifying the Mickle family's Black Lives Matter flag as a nuisance. Let's stop and think about those words for a moment. Noxious. Offensive. These are terms you would use to describe a chemical spill, a foul odor, a pile of rotting garbage. This is the language the Homeowners Association chose to describe a black family's quiet declaration that their own lives have value. The letter didn't just ask for the flag to be removed, it demanded it, threatening fines and legal action, a path that, for any homeowner, can ultimately lead to a lien on their property and even foreclosure. Imagine receiving that letter after calling a place home for nearly 2 decades. It's a message that says more than, "You broke a rule." It's a message that says your voice isn't welcome here. It says your identity is a problem. It says your existence, expressed in this way, is offensive. The HOA had drawn a line in the sand, and they had chosen their target. That first letter was not the end of the matter. It was just the opening salvo. The River Point Community Association and its management company seemed absolutely determined to make Antoine Mickle back down. When he didn't immediately surrender and remove the flag, the threats began to escalate, becoming more serious and more financially menacing. The HOA prepared to levy fines against him for every single day the flag remained flying. This is a common but brutal tactic used by HOAs. The fines start small, but they accumulate, day after day, designed to bleed a homeowner dry financially until they can no longer afford to resist. The ultimate threat in these disputes, however distant it may seem at first, always hangs in the background, the threat of losing your home. HOAs have the power to place a lien on a property for unpaid fines and assessments. An unpaid lien can lead to foreclosure proceedings. The very home that Mr. Mickle had worked for 20 years to secure was now being implicitly threatened by the organization meant to protect the community's property values. What made this entire ordeal so outrageous, so transparently unjust, was the blatant, undeniable hypocrisy. As Mr. Mickle and his lawyers would later document with photographic evidence, his neighborhood was filled with other flags. Yet only one was being targeted. A simple drive or walk through the River Point community revealed a variety of expressions. There were flags supporting then-President Donald Trump. There were thin blue line flags, which expressed support for law enforcement. None of these flags were seasonal, like a Halloween or Christmas decoration. None of them were flown on a separate, dedicated flagpole. They were attached directly to the houses, in the exact same manner as the Mickle family's Black Lives Matter flag. This is the point where the HOA's entire argument disintegrates under the weight of its own contradiction. Their selective enforcement exposed their true motive. It was never about the flag itself, the physical object. It was about the message on the flag. By allowing pro-Trump and pro-police flags to fly without consequence, while simultaneously branding the Black Lives Matter flag a nuisance, the HOA was sending a clear, unambiguous, and discriminatory message. They were actively creating a tiered system of speech, where some political views were deemed acceptable and welcome, while another, specifically one affirming black life, was deemed offensive and worthy of punishment. When pressed on this glaring double standard, the HOA tried to twist its own rules to create a post hoc justification. In a public statement, they claimed the problem was that Mr. Mickle was flying a non-specific time period flag from his house instead of from a flagpole. They even went so far as to claim that a letter would have been sent for a Blue Lives Matter flag if it were flown in the same way, a claim that was directly contradicted by the photographic evidence included in the lawsuit, showing that exact flag flying from a resident's home without any apparent issue. They also argued that flags attached to houses had to be seasonal in nature, a rule that, if applied fairly, should have also disqualified the Trump and thin blue line flags. It was a flimsy, transparent excuse for a targeted, discriminatory act. This was no longer a simple disagreement over bylaws. It was escalating into a campaign of harassment. Mr. Mickle articulated the emotional toll it was taking, stating plainly, "I can't even sit in my home and feel comfortable." His sanctuary had been violated. His home had become a source of stress and fear. The HOA had picked a fight, assuming he would be an easy target who would quietly back down. They were profoundly mistaken. There comes a point in any conflict where you have to make a fundamental decision. Do you absorb the punishment and endure the injustice in silence, or do you stand up and fight back? For Antoine Mickle, that moment had arrived. The assault on his flag was more than just a citation. It was a public declaration from his HOA that his family's right to exist, to speak, and to express their identity was noxious and offensive. This was a line he was not willing to let them cross. He decided he would not be bullied, he would not be silenced, and he would not take down his flag. Instead of submitting, he sought help. That single decision flipped the entire script. The one-sided pressure campaign from the HOA was about to become a two-sided legal battle. The absolute game-changer was bringing in a high-profile, powerhouse legal team, led by the renowned civil rights attorney Ben Crump. This was a massive development. Crump is a name that carries immense weight, known nationally for representing the families of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Trayvon Martin. His involvement instantly elevated the case from a local dispute to a national news story. This was no longer a small neighborhood squabble. It was now a significant civil rights issue on a national stage. The legal team's strategy was brilliant in its clarity. They weren't going to get bogged down in a petty argument about flag bylaws. They knew that wasn't the real issue. Their case was built on a much more powerful principle: the right to equal treatment under the law. They filed a federal lawsuit against the HOA for racial discrimination and harassment, invoking the full power of the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 is a landmark piece of federal legislation born out of the civil rights movement. It expressly prohibits housing discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. Crucially, the act also makes it illegal for anyone to interfere with any person in the exercise or enjoyment of their property. While a homeowners association is a private entity, it is absolutely bound by the Fair Housing Act. An HOA cannot use its own internal rules and bylaws as a shield to engage in discriminatory practices. The legal team's argument was devastatingly simple. By choosing to enforce its flag rule only against Antoine Mickle's Black Lives Matter flag, while deliberately ignoring other political flags displayed by white residents, the River Point HOA was committing a clear and textbook act of racial discrimination. Ben Crump articulated the stakes perfectly. The first day that he put up his Black Lives Matter flag, he was met with retaliation from the Homeowners Association. He framed the Mickle family's struggle as something much bigger, calling it a microcosm of what is happening all over America. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. The HOA, which had been acting with the unchecked authority of a petty kingdom, was now staring down the barrel of a federal lawsuit, backed by one of the most prominent civil rights legal teams in the country. The fight was no longer about a piece of cloth. It was about setting a powerful legal precedent that homeowners associations are not above the law. To understand the profound importance of this lawsuit, you have to look past the manicured lawns and serene cul-de-sacs of River Point and deep into the dark, often hidden history of homeowners associations in America. HOAs weren't originally created just to ensure conformity in mailbox designs and to manage shared swimming pools. Their origins, in many parts of the country, are deeply and inextricably tied to the history of racial segregation. In the early and mid-20th century, As suburbs began to expand, developers and white homeowners used a legal tool known as racially restrictive covenants. These were clauses written directly into a property's deed that explicitly banned anyone who was not white from buying, leasing, or even occupying a home in that neighborhood. For a significant period, the U.S. government's own Federal Housing Administration actively encouraged and sometimes even required these racist covenants as a condition for insuring mortgages, all under the guise of protecting property values in white neighborhoods. In 1948, the landmark Supreme Court case Shelley v. Kramer delivered a major blow to this system. The court ruled that while private parties could still write these racist covenants, state courts could not enforce them. It made them legally toothless. However, that didn't stop the underlying desire for exclusion. It wasn't until the passage of the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that housing discrimination based on race was made comprehensively illegal. But the impulse for segregation didn't just vanish, it evolved. It became more subtle. HOAs became a new vehicle for exclusion, using facially neutral rules that appear to have nothing to do with race on the surface, to achieve similar discriminatory goals. This is precisely where vague, subjective clauses like the one prohibiting noxious or offensive activities come from. They grant enormous discretionary power to HOA boards, which are often not very diverse, allowing them to interpret and enforce the rules based on their own personal, and often unconscious, biases. This history provides the crucial context for what happened to Antoine Michel. The nuisance clause, a seemingly neutral tool for community management, was weaponized against him. It was transformed into a modern-day instrument of exclusion. Research continues to show that this legacy persists. Even today, neighborhoods governed by HOAs are often less racially diverse than those without them. One study found that homes in HOA communities can sell for a premium of about 4%, creating an economic barrier that further reinforces patterns of residential segregation. The Michel family's lawyers are arguing that the River Point HOA is not an isolated case, but rather a continuation of a long, ugly tradition of using housing rules to discriminate. The selective enforcement of a simple flag rule is just a modern, more subtle way of sending a very old and very toxic message, a message about who belongs and who doesn't. The filing of the federal lawsuit officially moved this battle from the HOA's private boardroom into a public, federal courthouse. Here, the subjective whims of a board president and the flimsy excuses of a management company would be weighed against the formidable power of United States law. The suit, filed by Ben Crump and his legal team, named the River Point Community Association, its management company, and key individuals on the board as defendants. The allegations were severe, racial harassment, and unequal treatment in direct violation of the Fair Housing Act. The first major claim at the heart of the lawsuit is discriminatory enforcement. The legal team presented clear evidence, including time-stamped photographs, showing that the HOA knowingly and willingly permitted other residents, presumably white residents, to display overtly political flags, such as Trump 2020 banners and thin blue line flags, without facing any consequences. The lawsuit argues that by singling out and punishing only the Black Lives Matter flag, the HOA was not engaged in the neutral enforcement of a community rule, but in active discrimination based on the race of the homeowner and the pro-black content of his message. The second core claim is racial harassment. This argument posits that the HOA's actions went far beyond a simple rules dispute and constituted a persistent and illegal campaign to intimidate the Michel family, creating a hostile living environment. Calling a Black Lives Matter flag noxious and offensive is not neutral administrative language, it is inherently inflammatory and demeaning. When paired with the relentless threats of daily fines and the overarching threat of foreclosure, this behavior legally interferes with the family's fundamental right to the peaceful enjoyment of their home, a right explicitly protected by the Fair Housing Act. In its public defense, the HOA and its representatives claimed their actions were not discriminatory at all. They stated, "The fact that it was a Black Lives Matter flag made no difference," and insisted that the issue was merely a technicality about it being a non-specific time period flag, not displayed on a proper flagpole. They even had the audacity to claim the matter was closed. But that defense completely falls apart when confronted with photographic evidence of other unpunished flags that fit the exact same description. A federal court is designed to see past these kinds of flimsy excuses and to adjudicate based on facts and patterns of behavior. So, what does the Michel family hope to achieve with this lawsuit? First, They are seeking an injunction, a court order to permanently stop the HOA from forcing them to remove the flag. They are also likely seeking significant financial damages to compensate for the emotional distress and harassment they have endured. But most importantly, their lawsuit aims for systemic change. They want to force the River Point HOA to completely revise its policies to prevent this from happening again, and to require mandatory anti-discrimination training for all its board members. This case serves as a critical reminder that while HOAs may be powerful within their communities, federal law is, and must always be, more powerful. The story of Antoine Michel, his family, and his flag is about so much more than a petty neighborhood squabble. It is a powerful, modern-day parable about the ongoing fight for racial equality in every corner of America, not just in state houses or on city streets, but on quiet, suburban cul-de-sacs. This is a story about the fundamental meaning of home, a place that is supposed to represent safety, belonging, and the freedom of expression. For nearly 20 years, the Michel family invested their lives and their dreams in the River Point community, only to be told, in no uncertain terms, that their voice and their very identity were a nuisance. The Homeowners Association, an organization created with the stated purpose of upholding community standards and protecting property values, instead appears to have twisted its own rules to advance a discriminatory agenda. By all accounts, they turned a blind eye to pro-police and pro-Trump flags while aggressively targeting the Black Lives Matter flag, revealing that their true concern was never about the consistent application of rules, but about the silencing of a specific message they found undesirable. By labeling a simple affirmation of Black life as noxious and offensive, they disrespected, harassed, and attempted to intimidate a family in their own home. But this is also, and perhaps more importantly, a story of profound courage. Facing down intimidating letters, the threat of escalating fines, and the power of an organization that could ultimately take his home, Antoine Michel refused to be silenced. He refused to be intimidated. He chose to fight back. By taking his case to federal court, he transformed a deeply personal struggle into a public stand against discrimination, fighting not just for his own rights, but to ensure that no other family has to feel like an outcast in their own neighborhood. This case stands as a crucial test of whether the promises of the Fair Housing Act, won through decades of struggle, can stand up to the hidden biases and subtle forms of discrimination that too often hide within the bylaws of homeowners associations. The story isn't over, and the final outcome will reverberate far beyond Jacksonville, sending a powerful message to millions of homeowners across the country about their rights and the limits of HOA power. What are your thoughts on this? Does an HOA have the right to decide which political messages are acceptable and which are not? Have you ever had a run-in with an HOA that felt unfair or discriminatory? Share your stories and perspectives in the comments below. Your voice is a vital part of this important conversation. And if you believe that no family should ever be harassed for standing up for what they believe in, please share this story to help raise awareness. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates on this case and more stories of everyday people fighting for justice. Thank you for watching.